All right, welcome back. Today we're jumping into a real battle of ideas, a historic fight to understand what might be the most complex thing in the entire universe, the human mind.
So, here's the big question, right? How does the mind actually work? This is the question that has kept thinkers up at night for centuries. And it's what drove the pioneers of psychology to argue, to debate, and to build on each other's ideas, creating the very foundation of how we see ourselves today.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start at the very beginning with the first psychology lab. Then we'll watch as the field just splinters into these totally different directions. We'll see how a more positive, human-centered idea popped up, watch the mind make its big comeback, and then finally, we'll see how all these pieces of the puzzle start to fit together.
Okay, let's get into it. Our story kicks off in Germany, and this is a huge moment. It's the very first time someone tried to study the mind not just as a philosophical idea, but as something you could actually study scientifically. So let's meet the guys who started it all. You've got Wilhelm Wundt, who back in 1879 set up the first ever psychology laboratory in Leipzig, Germany. I mean, this was a massive deal. And his student, an Englishman named Edward Titchener, he's the one who took these ideas and really built them into psychology's very first school of thought. And they called their approach structuralism. The idea was to basically treat the mind like a chemist would. You know how a chemist breaks down water into hydrogen and oxygen? Well, structuralists wanted to break our consciousness down into its most basic parts. Things like sensations, feelings, images. And their main tool for doing this was something called introspection, where they'd ask people to just describe their raw, immediate experience of something. But not everyone was on board with this. Over in America, you have this brilliant psychologist and philosopher, William James, and he looked at what the structuralists were doing, and he asked a totally different kind of question. See, for him, it wasn't enough to just know what the parts of the mind were. He wanted to know, what's it for? What's its purpose? And this gave birth to functionalism. He was super inspired by Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution, and he argued that our thoughts and our feelings must have a function. You know, why do we feel fear? Well, it helps us escape danger so we can survive. This way of thinking really paved the way for modern evolutionary psychology. So the question totally flipped, right? It went from, what is the mind made of, to, hey, what does the mind actually do? And that debate, well, that really set the stage for the next act, because in the early 20th century, the field it blew apart. Two brand new and completely opposite schools of thought popped up, and it created this huge fight over what psychology should even be. All right, so in one corner, you've got the behaviorists. We're talking about guys like John B. Watson, B.F. Skinner, and Ivan Pavlov. These guys were all about hard data, and they made a really radical claim. If you can't see it, if you can't measure it, then it doesn't belong in science. And this idea became known as behaviorism. They completely tossed out introspection. To them, the mind was just this unknowable black box. Who cares what's inside? All that mattered was behavior you could see, which they believed was all learned from our environment. And you see this stuff everywhere today, from therapies that help us change our behavioral patterns to, the little reward systems built into the apps on your phone. Meanwhile, over in Vienna, one of the most famous and, let's be honest, controversial figures in psychology was doing the complete opposite. Sigmund Freud had zero interest in what was observable on the outside. He wanted to dive deep into what was hidden on the inside. What he came up with was psychoanalysis. He argued that what really drives us are these powerful unconscious forces. Hidden desires, deep fears, conflicts from childhood that we're not even aware of. Now, look, a lot of his specific theories are still debated today, for sure, but his ideas completely changed our culture and gave us the foundation for modern talk therapy. So you can see the clash, right? It was a total showdown for the soul of psychology. Should you only focus on the external, measurable behavior you can test in a lab? Or should you dive deep into the internal, unconscious mind, using tools like dream analysis and free association? But here's the thing. For a lot of people, both of these ideas felt, kind of bleak. Behaviorism made people seem like robots just reacting to things, while psychoanalysis was all about these dark, hidden conflicts. Something new was needed, a third way. And that's where two new thinkers come in, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. They became the champions of a new school of thought that offered a way more optimistic and empowering view of what it means to be human. Their new school of thought was called Humanistic Psychology, and it was nicknamed the Third Force. The core belief was pretty revolutionary for the time.
People aren't just puppets. We are fundamentally good, we have free will, and we have this built-in drive to grow and be better. This focus on well-being is a direct line to the super popular field of positive psychology today.
And Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs is the perfect picture of this idea. It shows that first we got to take care of our basic needs, right? Food, water, safety. But once those are met, we can start climbing, pursuing love, a sense of belonging, self-esteem, and finally, self-actualization. Becoming the absolute best version of ourselves we can be.
But hold on, the story is not over yet. As we head into the 1950s, while humanism is taking off, another revolution is quietly starting. New technology, specifically computer science, gave psychologists a brand new metaphor to work with. And that black box that the behaviorists slammed shut, well, it was about to get kicked wide open. And that was the cognitive revolution. All of a sudden, psychologists started studying all the stuff the behaviorists said was off limits: thinking, memory, how we solve problems. The big idea, the metaphor that changed everything, was thinking of the mind like a computer, an information processor. It takes in data, it stores it, it retrieves it. This not only put the mind back in the spotlight, but it's the foundation for things like artificial intelligence. Okay, so we've got all these different schools, all these different ideas, each looking at a different piece of this giant puzzle. But how do we put it all together? Well, interestingly enough, there was another school of thought from the early 20th century called Gestalt Psychology, and it gives us a really powerful way to think about this. This is the core belief of Gestalt Psychology. They argued that our minds are wired to see patterns, to see meaningful wholes, not just disconnected pieces. Think about it. When you see a bunch of dots arranged in a circle, what do you see? You don't see a bunch of dots, right? You see a circle. The whole pattern itself has a meaning that the individual parts just don't have on their own. So when we look back at this whole timeline, you can see this incredible evolution. No new school of thought just appeared out of thin air. Each one was a reaction, a response to what came before it, offering a new angle, a new attempt to understand the whole complicated picture of what it means to have a mind. And here's the big takeaway, the thing to really remember. None of these schools was 100% right and the others wrong. Each one gave us an absolutely essential piece of the puzzle. Structuralism gave us a way to study consciousness. Functionalism asks why. Behaviorism brought in scientific rigor. Psychoanalysis dove into the unconscious. Humanism reminded us of our potential for good. And cognitivism gave us the tools to understand thinking itself. They all built the amazing, diverse field of psychology that we have today.
And that really brings us to a final question, one for you. When you think about yourself, your own thoughts, your behaviors, what drives you, which of these big ideas clicks the most? Do you see yourself as a product of your environment, a seeker of your own potential, an information processor, or maybe a little bit of everything? The answer, just like psychology itself, is beautifully complex.